Houston never sleeps quietly. Even at midnight, the city hums. Freeways stacked 3 levels high, office towers burning light into a sky too bright to show stars. Somewhere in the Galleria district, a man in his mid-40s sits alone at a desk on the 14th floor, reading glasses on, coffee gone cold beside his keyboard. Numbers on the screen, clean columns, honest math. He is very good at finding what people hide. Pan down 14 floors. Street level. A car moves through River Oaks. Old money neighborhood, quiet streets, buildings that don't advertise themselves. A lobby. Fresh flowers. A doorman who knows every name. 4th floor, a door inside. A life arranged for 2. A throw blanket folded corner to corner. A photograph on the dresser. A necklace. Gold chain, sapphire pendant. The color of deep water. The man in the 14th floor office gave that necklace to someone he trusted completely. It is not where he thinks it is. The necklace was the thing that broke him. Not the LLC paperwork on the desk. Not the 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom. Not the closet with her burgundy jacket hanging beside another man's suits like they'd always belonged there. The necklace, gold chain, delicate, a sapphire pendant the color of deep water. He'd spent 3 weeks looking for that necklace. Walked into 4 different jewelry stores on 4 different Saturdays. Called her college roommate from a parking lot asking what she might love. Stood at a glass counter for 40 minutes while a saleswoman who was losing patience showed him options one by one until that one appeared. That specific shade of blue. It reminded him of the dress she'd worn on their first date. He'd given it to her for their 10th anniversary. She'd worn it to dinner that night and said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever given her. And here it was, in a photograph, in a condo in River Oaks, around her neck. Her head tilted toward a man Cedric had only recently learned the name of, the skyline of San Antonio, burning orange behind them. Her expression the kind you can't manufacture, ease, pure ease. The face of a woman who was in that moment completely at home. Cedric stood in the bedroom of that condo and looked at the photograph for a long time. He didn't touch it, didn't move it. Didn't do any of the things a man in a movie does when he finds the evidence that cracks the case wide open. No overturned furniture, no walls with his fist, no sound at all. He just stood there, breathing, feeling the full weight of what he was looking at without letting it move him yet. Because moving too soon was how you made mistakes. And Cedric Holloway had spent 20 years in other people's financial disasters, learning exactly how much damage a man could do when he acted on the first wave of feeling instead of waiting for the water to clear. He set the photograph back down, exactly as he'd found it. He walked through the bedroom more time, slowly, taking inventory the way he took inventory of everything, methodically, without editorializing, building the picture before he touched a single conclusion. The closet told him more than the photograph did. Camille's clothes on the left, the other man's on the right. Not crowded together, not crammed in, organized. 2 separate sets of shelves. 2 separate people who had learned the rhythms of a shared space and arranged themselves accordingly. This wasn't a place people visited. This was a place people lived. He left the bedroom, walked through the living room. The throw blanket on the couch was folded corner to corner, with one edge tucked under slightly. He'd watched Camille fold blankets that exact way 10,000 times in 12 years. And there it was. Here, in another life. The ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter held a spare key on a plain ring and a folded grocery list in her handwriting. Milk, coffee filters, something from the pharmacy. He didn't read the rest. He went to the desk by the window. The folder was labeled in her careful hand, CH Development Partners, Formation Documents. He opened it. Delaware LLC registration. 2 members, Camille A. Heron and Dion S. Mercer. Heron, not Holloway. Her birth name. The name she'd set aside 12 years ago when she married him. The name she was apparently picking back up, quietly, in a condo 20 minutes from their front door, in a folder on a desk beside a window that looked out at a park she'd probably learned to love by now. He put the folder back exactly as he'd found it. He left the condo, locked the door, took the elevator down, nodded at the doorman who held the lobby door open with the practiced indifference of a man who'd seen everything and considered it none of his business. Cedric walked 1 block to where he'd parked, got in. Hands on the wheel. The city moved around him the way cities do, completely indifferent to the specific gravity of any one person's moment. He sat there for 11 minutes. Then he drove home. The house in the museum district was a craftsman-style home they'd bought 11 years ago. 3 bedrooms. A front porch he'd always meant to use more. A kitchen with more counter space than two people who ordered takeout most nights could reasonably justify. He'd loved this house from the first walkthrough. Something about the way afternoon light came through the back windows in long round rectangles that turned the kitchen floor amber for about 40 minutes every evening. Before the sun dropped below the tree line, he pulled into the driveway without thinking about where to park. Sat for a moment without getting out. The front porch light was on, which meant Camille was home. Which meant he needed to be the version of himself that didn't know yet. He could do that. He'd spent 20 years sitting across from people who'd embezzled retirement funds and falsified insurance claims and hidden assets in their children's names. And he'd learned to keep his face and voice in separate rooms when the situation required it. He was 44 years old, and he had done this long enough to know the difference between feeling something and showing it. He got out of the car, walked to the front door, put his key in the lock. She was in the kitchen when he came through. Black blazer still on. Heels still on. She wore her work clothes the way some people wear armor, not because they were performing for someone, but because they weren't quite ready to stop yet. She looked up, smiled. The smile that had been hers for 12 years. "You're late," she said. "Client work. Same." They moved around each other in the kitchen the way long married people do. She poured a glass of water. He opened the refrigerator, looked at nothing, closed it again. She asked about his day. He gave her the version of it that was true. A complicated subcontractor audit, a discrepancy nobody else had caught. She half-listened the way people half-listen when their own day is still running through their head. Normal. Ordinary. The choreography of two lives that had learned to occupy the same space. And underneath it, Cedric held everything he'd seen in that condo with both hands and did not move. Not because he was numb. Because he understood, with the professional clarity that was sometimes the only thing he had, that the worst decisions get made in the first hour after discovery. When the shock is still wet. When emotion is sitting right on top of logic and you can't tell them apart. He was not going to make that mistake. Camille went upstairs to shower. He stood at the kitchen counter long after he heard the water start, looking at the amber light fading off the floor as the sun finished its nightly business outside. He thought about three things. Not about the condo, not about the necklace, not about the LLC with her birth name on it. Three small things that had been true about him for years. So quietly true that he'd stopped seeing them. The first, his Casio calculator. The one on his desk upstairs. He'd bought it in his second year of college when he couldn't afford a laptop. 22 years old now. A hairline crack in the lower left corner of the screen from the time he dropped it carrying boxes into their first apartment. He'd had the battery backup replaced twice. He didn't use it anymore. Had no practical reason to keep it. But it sat on the corner of his desk the way certain objects sit when they mean something you haven't put into words yet. The second, every morning, before opening his laptop, before looking at his phone, before entering the professional day in any way, he read one page. One from whatever book was on his nightstand. Fiction, non-fiction, didn't matter. Just one page. Just enough to remember that the world was made of something other than numbers. The habit had started during a brutal healthcare fraud case 12 years ago, when Camille had handed him a novel at 2 a.m. and said, "Read one page before you sleep or I'm hiding your laptop." He'd read one page, then another. Stayed up until 3 finishing it. Kept the habit ever since. The third, he always parked a block away from wherever he was going. Started out of necessity years ago in an apartment with no dedicated parking. Became something else over time. A buffer. A minute of transition between the person he was at work and the person he was supposed to be when he walked through a door. He hadn't done it tonight. Had pulled straight into the driveway without thinking. The habit overridden by everything else running through him. He noticed the absence now. Like a missed step. 3 small habits, made on purpose, kept without thinking. He thought about them now because he needed something solid to hold on to. Something that was simply, reliably, unchangeably his. Then he went upstairs, changed his shirt, came back down, made coffee he didn't drink, went to bed, did not sleep. The following Tuesday, Cedric was 3 hours into a forensic audit for a mid-sized construction firm when he found it. Not what he was looking for. He never found what he was looking for. He always found what was actually there instead. Bi-weekly cash withdrawals, every other Wednesday, $20,400 each. Clean and regular as a heartbeat. No receipt attached, no vendor name, no project code. The category someone had created for them, and Cedric had to lean in to read this, was labeled operational flexibility. He stared at that phrase, operational flexibility creative. Almost admirable in a specific kind of way. He flagged it, made 3 notes in his audit log, took a sip of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago without registering the temperature. And then without deciding King 2, his mind drifted sideways, to Wednesday evenings, to the particular fact that for the last, how long had it been, exactly? He actually had to count. 9 or 10 months Camille had been coming home late on Wednesdays. Working late, she always said. Client dinner. You know how it is. He did know. The consulting world didn't keep reasonable hours. He'd never questioned it. He was the last person who would question someone for working late. But he sat there in his office on a Tuesday afternoon with the flagged expense report on one screen and the calendar in his head word doing the arithmetic without being asked. Same day of the week, regular as a heartbeat. Stop, he told himself. You're tired. You find patterns because you're built to find them. You're not finding a pattern right now. You're projecting. He closed the expense report, opened it again, closed it. He went back to work, but the number sat there in the back of his mind. Not loudly, not dramatically, just present. The way a discrepancy sits in a ledger when you've seen it but haven't named it yet. 2 days later, Camille asked him to forward a file. She'd left her work laptop at home by accident. Rare but not unheard of, and needed a contract that had come in overnight. Could he log in, find it, send it to her phone? Simple enough. Her laptop password was their wedding anniversary backwards. He'd set it up for her years ago during an IT crisis and she'd never changed it. He typed it from memory without thinking, found the contract, forwarded it, and then, before he closed the browser, his eye caught the edge of something in her inbox. An email. Near the top, sender, a Gmail address made of numbers and letters that meant nothing. Subject line, clean and specific as a line item. River Oaks Unit, January renewal. He didn't open it. He closed the laptop, put it back exactly where he'd found it, slightly angled toward the window, the way she always left it. He went upstairs, changed his shirt, came back down, made a coffee he didn't drink. River Oaks Unit. River Oaks was 20 minutes from where they lived. Old money neighborhood. The kind of address where you didn't rent, you bought, or someone bought for you. January renewal. Not a first-time arrangement, a continuation. He thought about the bi-weekly cash withdrawals in the construction firm's books. About the way operational flexibility had sat in that spreadsheet, looking reasonable until you followed it and found out it wasn't reasonable at all. He picked up his phone and called Bernard Okafor. Bernard Okafor was 56 years old and had spent 23 years as an IRS investigator before Stock sat him down and said that the stress was going to kill him before his knees did. He'd retired to a house in Pearland with a garden he genuinely loved and a habit of keeping track of things that polite people pretended weren't trackable. He and Cedric had met through work, a shared case, a decade ago, where their 2 separate investigations had ended up pointing at the same person from different directions. They'd stayed in each other's orbit the way 2 people stay when they realize they speak the same language without having to explain the grammar. Bernard had a talent Cedric didn't. Cedric found things in numbers. Bernard found numbers in people, in the way people moved through the world and left traces they didn't know they were leaving. He understood how information flowed through public records, credit systems, utility registrations, the administrative infrastructure of daily life that most people never thought about, because why would you think about something that just worked? They met that evening at a barbecue spot in Midtown, the kind of place with paper towels in a roll on the table and meat that had been going since the previous afternoon. Bernard was already there when Cedric arrived, already working through a plate of brisket, not looking up. You sounded strange on the phone, Bernard said. Cedric sat down across from him. I need you to look for something. What kind of something? A River Oaks address. Connected to my wife's email. A rental. Maybe something else. Bernard stopped chewing. He looked at Cedric the way old friends look at each other when they want to say, are you sure you want to do this but know better? Because the answer is already in the asking. He went back to his brisket. Give me 48 hours. Cedric ordered something he didn't taste. Bernard called 47 hours later. Not a long call. Bernard wasn't a man who padded things out. Condo 4F, he said, building on Inwood just inside River Oaks. Lease under a man named Dion Mercer. Started January of last year. How long has it been running? The lease itself goes back almost 2 years. But she wasn't running linked accounts early on. First several months look like cash payments, off the books. The utility accounts, the grocery delivery, the internet, those she linked to a traceable email later, those go back 14 months, which meant she'd been careful in the beginning. Cash only, no digital trail until she felt settled enough to stop being careful. The shift from cash to linked accounts wasn't sloppiness, it was confidence. She'd decided, 14 months ago, that the operation was stable enough to run on the normal infrastructure of a lived life. That told him something about how she thought. "Who is Dion Mercer?" Cedric said. "Real estate development, runs a firm out of Greenway Plaza, clean record. Been a client of Vanguard Consulting for 3 years. Vanguard Consulting, Camille's firm." Cedric was standing in the parking structure beneath his office building. He pressed his back against a concrete pillar and held the phone and let that settle into him the way cold water settles. All the way down all at once. "The utilities," Bernard said, his voice going careful now, deliberate. "The voice you use with someone standing near an edge. Internet, grocery delivery accounts attached to the unit. I traced them through a forwarding address to an email account. Took me a while to follow it all the way back. Bernard, it's Camille's, there it was." He didn't gasp, didn't curse, didn't produce any of the sounds that movies associate with moments like this because he wasn't in a movie. He was in a parking structure under fluorescent lights, with the hum of ventilation systems overhead and the flat factual reality of what he'd just been told. "She's not visiting," Bernard said. "No, whoever set this up, she's managing it. Day to day, bills, deliveries, all of it." "And you got this through legitimate means," Cedric said. "Not an accusation, a procedural question." He needed to know the evidence would hold. Bernard made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. 23 years at the IRS gives you contacts in places that polite people don't acknowledge. Utility registrations are linked to credit inquiries she authorized when the accounts were opened. Public record adjacents. I didn't break any laws. I bent the concept of coincidence a little. I need this to hold up. It'll hold up. Everything as a have connects through accounts she opened herself. It's clean. How long on the lease total? Close to 2 years. But the 14 months is what you can prove cleanly, through the linked accounts. The earlier cash period. I can document the gap, which tells its own story. A gap in records where records should exist is evidence of its own kind. Cedric nodded to himself in the empty parking structure. "Thank you, Cedric." "I not yet?" "Thank you." He hung up. He stood there for another minute, maybe 2. The ventilation hummed. A car on a level above him started its engine. The sound bouncing off concrete in the way enclosed spaces have of making everything louder than it needs to be. He drove to the River Oaks condo. He needed to see the source, which is how the story reaches where it began. The necklace, the folder with her birth name, the photograph with the San Antonio skyline. He left the condo with nothing in his hands, locked the door behind him, walked to his car, drove home, parked a block away because some habits run so deep they operate without instruction. That night, after Camille's breathing slowed beside him into the rhythm of untroubled sleep, Cedric slipped out of bed and went to his home office. He closed the door, sat at his desk. The Casio calculator in its corner, the crack in the screen catching the desk lamp's light. He opened a new document, typed one line at the top. What do I actually know? Below it, without commentary, without the catastrophizing that was available to him if he wanted it. 3 columns. What he knew, what he suspected, what he still needed to verify. He'd been doing this for 2 decades. The act of it was steadying in a way that had nothing to do with the content. It took the thing screaming inside him and gave it a structure. Turned a weight into something he could carry with 2 hands, instead of a dev being buried under. By midnight, the document had 19 lines. He read it once, saved it under a file name that looked like a client project code. Because if Camille ever looked at his laptop, and she wouldn't, but if she did, it would look like work. In the most important sense, it was. He closed the laptop, sat in the quiet. The house made its small nighttime sounds around him. Refrigerator, vac, the occasional settling of old wood doing what old wood does. He thought about the LLC filing, development partners, C&H Camille Heron, not Holloway. The name she'd set aside when she married him, apparently being picked back up now, 1 document at a time, 14 months of preparation at a stretch. He went back to bed. He lay on his side and listened to his wife breathe. She slept without difficulty. He was still awake when the sky outside started going gray. By the time Saturday came, he needed air. He drove to Lorraine Dupree's bookstore. Between the Lines sat on a corner in Montrose, the kind of independent bookstore that survived because its owner had strong opinions about what people actually needed to read, and no patience for bestseller lists as a primary organizing principle. Lorraine had run it for 6 years, since 2 years after her husband died, and she found herself needing something to do with her hands and her mind at the same time. Cedric had stumbled in 18 months ago on a Saturday, when he was walking the neighborhood after a difficult week and needed to get out of the sun. Lorraine had been behind the counter sorting new arrivals and had looked up without making anything of his arrival and said simply, "Fiction or non-fiction? Depends on what I need to believe today," he'd said. She'd handed him a novel about a man who solved other people's problems and couldn't solve his own. He'd bought it without reading the jacket, finished it in 4 days, came back the following Saturday. He'd been coming back every Saturday since. She was unpacking a shipment when he pushed through the door that morning. Looked up, did the small nod that meant welcome back, "Look around, I'll be here." He walked the shelves slowly, the way he always did, taking in the whole shape of a space before committing to anything specific. He brought one book to the counter. She looked at the cover, looked at him. "Heavy week?" she said. He thought about the condo, the necklace, the folder with her birth name, the 19 lines in a document with a project code for a title. "Something like that," he said. She rang up the book, put it in a paper bag. He paid, stood at the counter half a second longer than necessary. "Lorraine," he said. You ever have to figure out something you didn't want to know the answer to?" She looked at him. Not quickly. The kind of looking that takes its time because it's actually trying to see. "I taught high school history for 14 years before this," she said. "History is mostly just that. Figuring out things people didn't want to know the answer to. Does it help, knowing?" She tilted her head slightly. "It hurts first, then it helps. The order matters." He nodded once, picked up the bag. "See you next Saturday," he said. "Take care of yourself," she said. The way she said things, simply, without drama, like it was a statement of fact rather than a wish. He walked out into the October morning. 2 blocks to his car, both hands on the wheel. He had a 19-line document on his laptop. He had 14 months of utility records. He had the image of a sapphire necklace around his wife's neck in another man's condo. And he had, for the first time since Tuesday, the specific resolve of a man who has decided that feeling the thing and acting on the thing are 2 different timelines, and he is going to stay on the right one. He drove home. He had work to do. There are men who go loud when they find out they've been lied to. They need the confrontation, the moment where someone looks them in the eye and accounts for what they did. Cedric Holloway was not one of those men. Not because he didn't feel it. Because he'd spent 20 years watching what happened when people acted before they understood the full shape of what was in front of them. He was going to understand the full shape, all of it, before he moved a single piece. Bernard called on a Monday, early. Before Cedric had finished his 1 page, which told him Bernard had been working since before the sun came up. No greeting, just, "You need to come see this in person." The drop to Perlin took 40 minutes in morning traffic. Cedric made it in 35. Bernard's house sat at the end of a quiet street, where the lots were wide enough that neighbors weren't in each other's business. The garden in the front yard was Bernard's real work. The thing he'd built in retirement the way other men built model trains or followed football. Late October had pulled most of the color out of it, the plants drawing inward, the whole yard going quiet in the way living things do when they sense cold is coming and decide to wait it out. Bernard answered the door before Cedric knocked, which meant he'd been watching for the car. The home office was a room Bernard took seriously. Bookshelves and 2 walls, a desk that had seen real work. And today a card table set up in the center with 3 stacks of printed documents arranged with the precision of a man who had spent 2 decades presenting evidence to people who were looking for reasons not to believe it. Bernard sat down across from the documents but didn't touch them yet. "How's your blood pressure?" he said. "Fine." "It's about to not be fine, Bernard." "Okay." He exhaled, set both hands flat on the table. "I pulled 14 months of joint account records, cross-reference with the home equity line, then went looking for anything adjacent business filings, secondary accounts, anything with her name or variations of her name." Cedric waited. "The 67,000. That's what you already suspected from the home equity line. That went into the CH Development Partners LLC as seed capital." He paused. "But the LLC didn't sit still. How much? Bernard put his hand on the center stack. 8 months of operating reports. Revenue from a commercial real estate consulting contract. Diane Mercer's development firm paying CH Development Partners for strategic advisory services. He looked up. Which is a legal arrangement, and a clean way to move money that looks like earned income, Cedric said. Yes. In 8 months, the LLC received $91,400. $91,000. In 8 months. Flowing through a company built with their shared home's equity, under his wife's birth last name, into a partnership with a man whose condo held a photograph of her wearing a necklace Cedric had spent 3 Saturdays finding. He looked at the documents without touching them, taking in the shape before the detail. Old habit. The one that had kept him accurate for 20 years. The home equity draw, he said. $67,000 from a joint asset used to seed a private LLC she didn't disclose to me. Under Texas Family Code, Bernard said carefully, that constitutes a fraudulent transfer from a real property to a separate legal entity without the other spouse's knowledge or consent. I know what it is. I know you know. I'm saying it out loud because there's a difference between knowing something as a professional and knowing it as a husband, and right now you're being asked to do both at the same time. Cedric looked at him. Old friend. The kind that told you the hard thing because softening it would be a form of disrespect. There's more, Bernard said. Of course. Beneficiary change on Cavill's life insurance policy. Filed 9 months ago. He found the page in the third stack, slid it across. She changed the primary beneficiary from you to a trust account. Name of the trust, Family Trust, established in Delaware, same month as the LLC. Cedric sat back September of last year. In a single month, she had filed the LLC in her birth name, established a family trust that excluded him, changed the beneficiary on her life insurance, and opened a joint investment account with Diane Mercer. Not impulse. Not the accumulated drift of a marriage losing altitude. Not 2 people growing apart the way people sometimes do accidentally without anyone deciding to. This was a calendar event, something you put a date to and execute. She wasn't leaving, Cedric said, quietly, working it out in real time, not to Bernard, to himself. No, Bernard said, she was relocating. Bernard nodded once, the slow nod of a man confirming something that has been in the room the whole time. One more thing, he said. And his voice changed register, quicker, more careful. The voice he used when information was going to damage something beyond the financial. Vanguard's merger. Cedric went still. Vanguard Consulting had announced a merger 6 weeks ago with a Chicago strategy firm. Camille had mentioned it at dinner, casually, the way she mentioned most work developments. Big deal, long time coming. She was the internal lead on the transition process. The deferred compensation package, Cedric said, $890,000. Vesting immediately on merger close, structured as professional compensation under the carve-out in your prenuptial agreement. Bernard looked at him directly, not a marital asset. Unless the court decides otherwise, given everything else on the table. Cedric had agreed to that prenup carve-out 12 years ago without hesitation. Camille was already building something real in consulting and he'd respected it. The carve-out had seemed like the generous, correct thing to do. It had seemed like trust made into legal language. Mergers closes when, he said. Bernard checked the top sheet of the first stack. 31 days from today. 31 days. Cedric turned the number over, felt its weight, followed it forward. She files after merger close. She has $890,000 in her own pocket, untouchable. Plus the LLC with $91,000 already through it. Plus whatever she'd been building in River Oaks for close to 2 years. And the fraudulent transfer from the home equity becomes a harder argument once her attorney has established the larger financial picture. Her attorney, Cedric said. Margaret Tate. He knew the name. Everyone in Houston's legal and financial world knew the name. Margaret Tate specialized in high-asset divorce, and she was the kind of attorney who didn't just know where the legal lines were. She knew exactly how close you could stand to them without making contact. How long has Camille been working with her? Bernard found the page in the third stack without looking for it. A billing record. Margaret Tate's firm. Client matter opened 14 months ago. 14 months. Same month the River Oaks utility accounts started. Same month the operation shifted from cash to linked accounts. From careful to confident. She hadn't been in an affair that grew into something more. She had been running a project. A project. With a lawyer and an LLC and a trust and a real estate investment and an exit timed precisely to the close of the biggest professional deal of her career. Cedric was a forensic accountant. He had spent 20 years finding exactly this kind of structure in other people's financial lives. He had not found it in his own. At his own kitchen table. In the house with the amber light. Beside the woman who had said it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, and worn the necklace he bought her to another man's condo, and hung it in a photograph on the wall. He sat with that for a moment. Just a moment. Then he picked up the 3 stacks of documents, squared them against the table, put them in Bernard's folder. "Thank you," he said. Bernard walked him to the front door, stopped him there with one hand briefly on his arm. The gesture of an old friend who has run out of words that are sufficient and knows it. He said, "I know. Whatever you do next, I know, Bernard." He walked to his car. The drive back to the city felt longer than the drive out. He called his attorney from his car before he started the engine. Not a family attorney. Clifton Graves worked out of Rice Village, in a quiet office that handled professional and business matters. And he was the kind of lawyer who understood that what you need right now and what you think you need right now were sometimes different questions requiring different answers. Cedric laid it out in less than 4 minutes. The LLC, the home equity draw, the trust, the beneficiary change. Margaret Tate's 14-month billing record. Clifton listened without interrupting. When Cedric finished, there was a pause, the calibrating kind. The pause of a professional who is reorganizing his picture of a situation without making a production of it. "You need Diane Parks," Clifton said. "Who is she?" "Best family law attorney in Houston for what you're describing. She knows fraudulent transfer inside out. She's handled 3 cases this year that involved similar LLC structuring." A pause. "She's also not someone Margaret Tate enjoys being across a table from. Can you make the introduction today? I'll call her in the next hour." Cedric, the careful pause again, "Document everything before you do anything else. Time-stamped. Organized. Already done. Good man." He hung up. Sat in the car outside Bernard's neighborhood. The sky over Pearland was the flat gray of a day that hadn't decided what it wanted to do yet. October doing its indecisive thing. He thought about the 19-line document on his laptop. He was going to need more lines before this was over. He drove back toward the city. Living in the same house as someone you are quietly investigating is a specific kind of discipline. It requires you to be present without being transparent, to respond to questions without revealing what you know. To sit across a dinner table from a woman who has spent 14 months building a departure strategy and hand her the salt when she asks for it and ask about her day, like the question means what it has always meant. Cedric did this for 9 days. He went to work, did his job, filed his construction firm report and received a thank you email he didn't fully read. He came home on the evenings Camille was there. He made dinner on the evenings she worked late. He set the table for 2 whether she was home or not. He read his 1 page every morning. He noticed, during those 9 days, how good Camille was at this. Not with contempt. Not with the bitterness that would have been available to him if he'd wanted it. Just notice. The professional acknowledgement of someone who recognized competence. She was very good at being present in a life she had already mentally left. She asked about his cases, laughed at the right moments, fell asleep beside him with the uncomplicated ease of someone whose conscience had made its peace with its choices. He lay awake those nights and thought about the structure, the LLC, the trust, the billing records going back 14 months, the cash payments in the months before that, the careful early period when she'd been running everything off the grid. And he thought about something Bernard had said at the card table in Pearland. Whoever set this up knew how you think. He'd meant it as information. But it was the thing that stayed with Cedric at 2 a.m. while his wife slept beside him. She had studied him, not guessed at him, studied him, understood his rhythms and his habits and his professional instincts, and built her exit strategy around the shape of his trust. He turned that over in the dark, didn't push it away, didn't catastrophize it. Just held it and looked at it honestly. The woman who had done this was the same woman who had sat beside him at 2 a.m. during a brutal audit case and handed him a novel without explaining herself, who had known, without being told, that what he needed in that moment wasn't a solution, just presence. She had understood him that precisely, and she had used that understanding for this. He didn't have a column for that in his 19-line document. Some things don't fit in columns. On the 10th day, Diane Parks called to schedule their first meeting. Diane Parks was 53 years old and occupied a corner office in Greenway Plaza with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent a career in rooms where people were at their worst and had learned to stay level in all of them. She read the documents Cedric brought without commenting. He sat across from her and watched her go through the folder Bernard had assembled. The home equity draw, the LLC filing, the Delaware trust registration, the beneficiary change, the billing record from Margaret Tate's firm dated 14 months back. She read everything with the same expression, which was no expression at all, the professional stillness of someone who had processed worse and knew that her reaction was not the point. When she finished, she looked up. "How long have you known?" she said. 3 weeks of confirmed facts, the sense that something was wrong, long. "Your wife doesn't know you know." "No." Diane Parks looked at him with the particular quality of attention that isn't sympathy and isn't judgment. Something closer to respect. For the discipline it took to hold something like this and not move prematurely. "The fraudulent transfer is your foundation," she said. "The home equity draw to seed an undisclosed LLC is a breach of fiduciary duty under Texas Family Code, combined with the undisclosed personal relationship with a business associate." She paused. "How long until the merger closes?" 22 days. "We file before then." "That was my understanding." Once she's served, Margaret Tate's first move will be to establish the merger compensation as separate property under your prenup carve-out. We need the fraudulent transfer claim on the record before that argument gets made. She looked at the investment account document. The joint LLC account she opened with Mercer. That's marital funds directed to a commingled investment without your consent. That's our second argument. What's the realistic outcome? Diane set down her pen, the gesture of someone shifting from procedure to honesty. "You're not going to recover everything. Margaret Tate is good and she's had 14 months to prepare her client's position. But the fraudulent transfer claim gives you leverage on the home equity amount plus interest. The investment account gives you a claim on whatever it's generated. And the merger compensation." She paused. "That one depends on how the court weighs her conduct during the marriage against the prenup language. It's not certain, but it's an argument worth making." "What do you need from me?" "Everything Bernard found. Organized, time-stamped, sourced." She looked at him. "I'm told you built this the way you'd build a forensic audit." "Yes, good. That's exactly what's going to protect you." He left her office and drove home. He didn't take the highway. Took the surface streets through the medical center, past Rice University. The kind of route that added 12 minutes and required enough attention to keep the other thoughts at a manageable volume. He passed the Museum District neighborhood 2 blocks from his house. The trees on his street had lost most of their leaves by now. The garden bed in the front yard, Camille's herbs, the rosemary she'd been proud of, the basil that had done better than expected, had gone dormant for the season. The whole yard quiet and waiting. He parked a block away, walked home, went inside, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table with the afternoon light doing its amber thing across the floor. And for a few minutes he let himself simply stare in his own kitchen with no column to sort what he was feeling into. Then he opened his laptop and got back to work. The call came on a Tuesday evening at 8:47. Cedric was in his home office, door closed, reviewing the documents Diane had asked him to organize. Camille was in the living room on a work call, her voice carrying down the hall with the smooth authority she used when managing a client's expectations. Calm, unhurried, completely in command. The number on his screen was Phyllis, his sister. He stepped into the hallway, pulled his office door half closed, walked to the far end of the hall away from Camille's voice. "Hey," he said quietly. What came back wasn't a greeting. It was the sound of someone who had been holding a breath for a very long time, too long, and had finally, on this particular Tuesday evening, run clean out of the ability to hold it anymore. "Cedric." Her voice was thin, pulled tight. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me say all of it. Because if you stop me," she paused, steadied herself. "I don't know if I can get back to the beginning." He put his back against the hallway wall, felt soft the solid neutral reality of drywall and paint. "I'm listening," he said. She talked for 9 minutes without stopping. He did not stop her once. 16 months ago, Phyllis had been at a charity fundraiser for Houston Methodist, where she worked as a pediatric nurse. She'd been there in her professional capacity, department representative, table host, the kind of evening she attended twice a year and didn't particularly enjoy because the shoes were always wrong. She'd been filming a short clip for the hospital's social media account when she'd looked up and seen them. Camille and a man she didn't recognize, standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Not touching, not doing anything that could be called overt, but standing in the way two people stand when they've moved past the performance of being just colleagues. When the distance between them has been calibrated to exactly as far apart as they can manage, while still being unmistakably close. Phyllis recognized the body language the way she recognized symptoms. 22 years of pediatric nursing had trained her to read what wasn't being said. Children couldn't always tell you where it hurt. You learned to watch. She'd watched. And her phone, already recording, had kept recording. She hadn't realized what she'd caught it until she got home and played back the clip for the hospital account. 51 seconds. Camille and the man near the windows. His hand at the small of her back for 3 seconds before she shifted and he moved it. The practiced adjustment of two people who had been careful for a long time. And Camille's face, profile half lit by the Houston skyline behind her, wearing an expression Phyllis had never seen on her sister-in-law's face in 12 years. Not happiness exactly, something more settled than happiness. Ease. Complete unguarded ease. The face of a woman who was in that moment entirely at home. Phyllis had sat on her bedroom floor that night and watched the 51 seconds 7 times. Then she hadn't told anyone. For 16 months. Why? Cedric said. His voice came out quiet. Not angry, just the word. A long silence. Because I was 6, Phyllis said. And then she told him the other thing. 6 weeks after the fundraiser, she'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. Early stage, caught in time, prognosis genuinely good. But the 8 months of treatment that followed had consumed everything she had. Every reserve, every unit of capacity. She'd gone to work when she could. Gone to treatment when she had to. Called their mothers twice a week and said she was fine. She hadn't told Cedric about any of it either. I was using everything just to get through, she said. I couldn't carry your marriage and my cancer at the same time. I know that's... Her voice broke, held. I know that's not an excuse. He stood against the wall. From the living room, Camille's work call had ended. He could hear her moving around. The small domestic sounds of a woman ending her evening in a house she was planning to leave. Are you okay now? He said. A pause. Getting there, Phyllis said. Last scan came back clean. I'm getting there. He closed his eyes for a moment. His sister, 40 minutes away, fighting cancer alone, carrying a secret that was eating her from one direction, while illness ate her from another. And not one word about either to him. The thought arrived plainly. This is what silence costs. Not the person keeping it. The people around them, each carrying their weight separately, when they might have survived it together. I have the clip, Phyllis said. And there's something else. A woman at my church who moves in legal circles. She mentioned Camille's name and Margaret Tate's together. Said it's been going on for a while, over a year. He already had the billing record. 14 months. He didn't say that yet. Send me the clip, he said. Cedric, send it, Phyllis, a beat. Are you angry at me? She said. He thought about it. Not quickly, not to spare her feelings, actually thought about it. No, he said. Not right now. I'm sorry. I should have. Come over this weekend, he said. Bring foods, I don't care what. Just come. A long silence. Then, very softly, he hung up, stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he walked downstairs, poured a glass of water he'd been forgetting to drink for days, and stood at the kitchen sink and drank all of it. The clip arrived on a phone at 10:22 that night. He watched it in his home office with the door closed, desk lamp on. The Casio calculator in its corner catching the light. 51 seconds. He watched it 3 times. Not because he was looking for something he'd missed. Because he was trying to understand the expression on his wife's face. Really understand it. Without the noise of what it meant for him. Just the expression itself. He understood it on the 3rd viewing. She looked like a woman who had already made a decision. Not in that moment, the decision was old by then, settled, carried comfortably. What he was seeing wasn't the moment of choosing. It was what comes after. The specific piece of someone who has stopped second-guessing themselves. He closed the clip, put his phone face down, sat in the quiet of his office in the house he'd loved since the first walkthrough, listening to the sounds of his wife moving around below him. He didn't cry. He thought he might. He'd prepared for it in some corner of his mind. But what arrived wasn't tears. It was something slower and heavier and more permanent. Understanding. The full shape of it. Unobstructed, complete. This wasn't a marriage in trouble. Wasn't two people who needed a difficult conversation or a weekend away or the intervention of a good therapist. This was a marriage that had already ended. Without him. While he brought her tea on Tuesday evenings and set the table whether she was home or not, and trusted the numbers in their shared accounts without running a check, because why would he need to check? He trusted her. It had already ended. She just hadn't told him yet. He sat with that for a long time. Then he turned off the desk lamp and did the thing he'd been building toward for 3 weeks. He called Diane Park's emergency line and left a message. I have the supplemental evidence you asked for. I'm ready to proceed. Call me in the morning. He set his phone down. He went to bed. He still didn't sleep easily. But for the first time since October, the sleeplessness felt different. Not the helpless kind. Not the kind that spins in place. The kind that comes before action. The kind that means something is about to move. There is a moment in every audit when the picture becomes complete. Not when you have every piece. You never have every piece. But when you have enough. When the structure is clear and the evidence is documented, and you understand not just what happened but how it was designed to happen. That was where Cedric Holloway had arrived. He had the full picture. And now, with 22 days, until a merger closed that someone had been counting on for 14 months, he was going to do what he always did when the audit was complete. He was going to file the report. The filing went through on a Monday, early November. The first real cold front of the season had pushed down from the north overnight, and Houston was doing what Houston always did with cold, treating it like an unexpected houseguest, slightly uncertain how to behave. Cedric sat across from Diane Parks and initialed where she told him to initial, signed where she told him to sign, read every page before he touched it because that was who he was. And Diane had already learned this about him and didn't rush him. When it was done, she set down her pen. It's filed, she said. Camille's attorney will be formally notified by end of business today. How before Camille knows? Margaret Tate will call her within the hour of receiving notification. Which means Camille will know by late afternoon. She looked at him steadily. This is the part where things become real in a different way than they've been real so far. I know. Whatever happens in the next 48 hours, whatever she says, whatever approach she takes when she comes home tonight, you don't engage on the substance. That's my job now. Stood, Cedric. A pause. The kind that meant she was about to say something she didn't say to everyone. You did this correctly. You documented everything before you moved. You didn't confront her before the filing. You didn't give her time to restructure. She gathered the signed copies into their folder. A lot of people in your situation would have gone home that first night and said something. You didn't. That discipline is going to matter. He nodded once, stood, picked up his jacket. Thank you, he said. I'll call you when Margaret Tate spawns. He walked out through the lobby of the Greenway Plaza building into the November air, stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The cold was real today. Not Houston's usual performance of cold. Actual temperature, actual wind, the kind that meant it. He walked to his car, got in, hands in his lap, not on the wheel. He thought about what real meant in the way Diane had used it. It had felt real in the River Oaks condo with the necklace. It had felt real when Bernard slid the billing record across the table. It had felt real at 10:22 at night watching 51 seconds of his wife's face in a room she hadn't known was being filmed. But those had all been private realities. This was different. This was the moment the thing he knew became the thing the world knew. The moment it entered the system, got a case number, became a matter of record. There was no version of that moment that didn't carry weight. He started the engine, drove back to his office, worked for 6 hours on the construction audit he'd been carrying for 2 months. Because working was what he knew how to do, and because the alternative was sitting still with everything he was feeling. And he needed to wait until he was somewhere he could set it down properly before he let himself do that. Margaret Tate called Diane Parks at 3:41 that afternoon. Diane relayed it in a voicemail he listened to in his car at 5:50. Margaret Tate requesting an emergency meeting to discuss settlement terms. Her client is asking for a 30-day pause on all proceedings pending merger close. He sat with that for a moment. 30 days. 30 days meant the merger closed first. $890,000 landing cleanly in Camille's pocket before any court had examined the full picture of their finances. Before any judge had looked at 14 months of billing records and LLC filings and beneficiary changes and a Delaware trust built in her birth name. He called old Diane back. No, he said. I'll communicate that. Also communicate that we have the fraudulent transfer documentation. The investment account records the LLC formation, the trust, and the beneficious change. All of it organized and time-stamped. I know. I have it. Make sure Margaret Tate knows we're not operating on incomplete information. A pause. Cedric. Margaret Tate already knows. That's exactly why they're asking for 30 days. They know what you have. He nodded to himself in the quiet of his car. Of course. The 30 days wasn't panic. It was tactics. Margaret Tate wasn't a woman who panicked. She was doing precisely what she'd been hired to do. Buying her client enough time to reach the finish line that the whole plan had been built around. Except the finish line had moved. Because Cedric had filed first. He drove home, parked a block away, stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the November evening. Streetlights on. A neighbor walking a dog down the block. The regular rhythm of a street that didn't know or need to know what had just changed. He walked to his front door, put his key in the lock, went inside. Camille was already home. He knew from the lights. The specific arrangement she made of the house when she was in it. Kitchen light on, the small lamp in the living room, the light above the spot of the stove she always switched on in the evening even when she wasn't cooking. He'd lived inside that arrangement for 12 years without naming it. He knew it now the way you know something you're about to lose. He set his keys on the hook by the door. The hook they'd used since the day they moved in. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen. She was at the counter, not cooking, just standing. A glass of wine held in both hands. Her phone face down on the marble. She was looking at the back window, at the garden bed, the dormant rosemary, the last of the evening light going gray outside. She didn't turn around when he came in. She knew he was there. Margaret called me, she said. I know. You filed. Yes, she turned, slowly. And he saw something on her face he hadn't seen in the entire 3 weeks he'd been carrying this. Something underneath the composure, pressing up against it from the inside, not breaking through, but visible in the way structural damage is visible before a wall comes down. You see the line, you understand what it means. How long have you known? She said. Long enough to document everything. That's not? She stopped, reset. How long? 3 weeks of confirmed facts, he said. The sense that something was wrong, longer than that. She looked at him. Really looked. The way people look when they're trying to determine how much has been seen. What the exposure actually is. I want to explain, she said. I know you do. Cedric, his voice was even, not cold, not cruel. The voice of a man who has had 3 weeks to get to the other side of the first wave of feeling and is now standing on solid ground. I'm not going to have a conversation tonight about why. That conversation would be for me. And I don't think it would actually help me. She set her wine glass down on the counter, very carefully. Sound of glass on marble, small and final. He moved then, not toward her, to the counter beside the refrigerator, where he'd left the Casio calculator that morning. His hands had put it there without instruction, the same way they parked a block away and read 1 page before the day started. He set it on the table between them. She looked at it, then at him. What is that doing there, she said. You know what it is. You bold calculate. He's 2nd year of college. I couldn't afford a laptop. You said, he paused. Got the words right. He wanted them right. You said I can't fix the tuition situation, but I can fix this one. She was quiet. I kept it because I trusted it, he said. I knew exactly what it would do, every time. He looked at the calculator, not at her. You knew me that precisely, Camille. You understood exactly how I worked. What I'd check and what I'd never think to check. What I'd question and what I'd let go because trusting you was something I'd decided to do the same way I decided to read 1 page every morning. On purpose, without reconsidering it every day. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. You built the whole thing around how I think, he said. The home equity draw through a line we'd set up years ago and never used. The LLC in your birth name in Delaware so it wouldn't surface in a casual text record search. The bi-weekly pattern that matched nothing unusual in our household rhythms. He was still looking at the calculator. I find financial fraud for a living, and you knew me well enough to build something I wouldn't find. Cedric, I'm not saying this to hurt you. He looked up at her now, directly. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I understand what this was. Not a mistake, not something that happened to you. A plan, a good one. 14 months of good work. Something moved across her face. Not quite guilt, not quite grief. Something more complicated. the expression of a person who has just heard themselves described accurately and found the accuracy harder than any accusation would have been. "I didn't know how to leave," she said, and her voice was small in a way her boardroom voice never was. I know it doesn't make it better. But I didn't know how to be the person who left. So I became the person who made leaving look like something else," he said. She didn't answer. He picked up the Casio calculator, looked at it for a moment. The crack in the lower left corner of the screen, the solar strip across the top, the keys that clicked with the satisfying certainties of something that had never once told him the wrong answer. He set it in his jacket pocket. "Divorce papers will be filed formally by end of week," he said. "Diane Parks has everything." He walked to the kitchen doorway, stopped, didn't turn around. "I hope you find what you were building toward," he said, without bitterness. Without the specific satisfaction that bitterness would have given him and that he'd decided. Somewhere in the second week of all this, he didn't want. I mean that. He walked out. The front door closed behind him. Not slammed, just closed. The way a book closes when you've read the last page and held it for a moment before setting it down. He stood on the front porch in the November air, the porch he'd always meant to use more. The cold was real tonight. He stood in it for a minute without his coat, just standing, and let the temperature be exactly what it was. Then he got in his car. He didn't drive anywhere in particular, just drove. Pazium district down Main Street, along the edge of Herman Park where the trees had finally let go of their leaves and the paths looked wide and clear in the darkness. He drove until the first wave of feeling had moved through him completely. Then he went back, parked a block away, walked home. 3 days after the filing, an email arrived from an address he didn't recognize. He almost deleted it. The subject line was just his name, Cedric. No punctuation, no context. The kind of email that usually meant nothing worth reading. He opened it. The sender identified herself as Reese Caldwell, a paralegal who had worked at Margaret Tate's firm until 2 weeks prior, when she'd resigned to take a position elsewhere. She explained carefully, in formal and precise language, that she was not violating any privilege. What she was about to share was information she had personal knowledge of, not anything covered by attorney-client confidentiality. And then she told him. Camille had retained a private investigation firm 13 months ago. The firm was called Sutton Sentinel Investigative Services, based in the Memorial area of Houston. The contract had been opened under the name CH Consulting, the same naming convention as the LLC as the trust. A consistent brand built for a specific purpose. The subject of the investigation, Cedric Holloway. Duration, 13-month. Scope, daily movements, professional patterns, personal associations, financial behavior, recurring locations, habitual routes. He read it twice. Then he sat very still for a long time. Not because he doubted it, because he was working through what it meant. Really working through it, without the noise of reaction. The way he worked through everything when the first instinct was to react, and the better instinct was to understand. She had watched him. 13 months. While he made her coffee in the mornings and set the table on Tuesday nights and drove to Bernard's when he needed the truth about something and came home and read one trust the numbers in their shared accounts without checking. Because why would he check? He'd made a decision to trust her. He'd made it on purpose. It was the most deliberate thing he'd done. She had needed to know he wouldn't find out before she was ready. And she had spent 13 months making sure of it. Not by trusting him not to look. By watching him closely enough to know in real time exactly what he was looking at. He thought about the things he'd told us himself in the weeks after River Oaks, that he hadn't seen it because he'd chosen to put trust in a different category from professional scrutiny. That he'd made a deliberate decision not to audit the people he loved. That this decision in a different marriage would have been the right one. All of that was still true. And alongside it, this new true thing. She had studied the decision, had identified it as a structural element of how he moved through his marriage, and had built her plans to specifications drawn from his habits. He had parked a block away every day for 12 years, and someone had been paid to note it. He sat in the morning quiet of his home office. Camille had left early. There were meetings she still had to attend while the legal process did its slow work, and looked at the email until the words stopped being words and became simply the final piece of a picture that was now, fully and without remainder, complete. He wrote back to Reese Caldwell. 2 sentences. Thank you for telling me. I hope the new position is everything the last one wasn't. He sent it, closed the email, picked up his phone and called Bernard. "I need you to verify something," he said. "Sentinel Investigative Services in Memorial. I need confirmation they were retained through a business account called CH Consulting." A pause. "How'd you find out?" "Someone with direct knowledge reached out. Give me a few hours." Bernard called back in 2. Confirmed. 13-month contract. Closed 4 weeks ago, right around when the merger announcement went public and the timeline apparently felt settled enough to stop. 4 weeks ago, Cedric said. 4 weeks. Which meant she'd called off the surveillance around the time she thought the finish line was in sight. The investigation as a tool, deployed for exactly as long as it was needed and not a day longer. Efficient. Right to the end. "Cedric, you doing okay?" He thought about it honestly. "Getting there," he said. He called Diane Parks next. He told her about the surveillance, a silence on her end, not the calibrating kind, the genuinely surprised kind, which from Diane Parks meant something. 13 months, she said, confirmed through a second source. "That changes the character of the fraud argument significantly," she said. "It demonstrates premeditation at a level that goes beyond financial planning. She wasn't just structuring an exit. She was actively monitoring the person she was structuring it against." A pause. Market-based and a very uncomfortable conversation with her client today. Is it enough to affect the merger compensation question? It's enough to make the court look at the prenup carve-out in the context of a spouse who was simultaneously conducting covert surveillance of the other party. "I can't promise outcomes, but I can promise it matters." He thanked her. He drove to the construction firm to deliver his completed audit report in person, which he didn't always do but felt right today. He needed the movement, needed the ordinary professional transaction of handing a finished piece of work to the people who'd asked for it. He handed over the report. They thanked him. He drove back through the city, into the museum district, into his neighborhood, home. The merger did not close on schedule. It closed 11 days late. Cedric didn't track this in real time. He learned it afterward, from Diane, who laid it out in a phone call with the measured efficiency of a professional reporting results. When Vanguard Consulting's legal team received formal notification of the pending divorce proceedings, including the fraudulent transfer claim, the undisclosed LLC, the joint investment account with a current client, and the covert surveillance of the other spouse, they'd required a full legal and compliance review before the merger could proceed. 11 days of review. The merger closed after the divorce filing was already a matter of record, which meant the deferred compensation was now subject to judicial examination within the context of the full picture of Camille's conduct during the marriage. "It doesn't mean she loses the compensation," Diane said carefully. "The prenup carve-out still exists. But it means the court will weigh it against documented financial misconduct and a 13-month surveillance operation against the other party. That's a different conversation than a clean, professional separation." "What happens at Vanguard?" Cedric asked. "That's not my area. But I understand the merger has conditions attached now that weren't in the original agreement. Their Chicago partners weren't told about any of this before signing." He didn't ask further. It wasn't his concern. What happened at Vanguard was a consequence. He hadn't set out to damage the merger. He'd filed when the evidence was documented and the legal timing was correct. The merger timeline was Camille's problem, the same way the LLC and the attorney and the 13 months of surveillance had been his problem, until they weren't. The ledger was settling. That was all. Not a victory, a consequence. He understood the difference the same way. He understood the difference between fraud and error. Both produced the same wrong number at the bottom of the column, but only one of them was the result of deliberate decisions made by someone who understood exactly what they were doing. He heard, through Bernard and through the particular information flow of the Houston professional community, how the days following the merger delay unfolded. Dion Mercer, whose firm's relationship with Vanguard Consulting was now under a conflict of interest review, retained his own legal counsel. The LLC that bore his name alongside Camille's birth name became a liability rather than an asset. The River Oaks condo, the 14th floor life with the folded blankets and the sapphire necklace on the wall, became complicated territory as attorneys on 3 sides began examining what had flowed in and out of it, and Camille, who had spent 14 months preparing for a clean exit at a moment of maximum financial strength, found herself instead in the middle of a contested proceeding with her professional reputation under institutional scrutiny and her carefully structured timeline in pieces. Cedric heard all of this. He didn't celebrate any of it. He went to work, filed his reports, caught discrepancies, did the job. Camille moved out on a Tuesday. She did it while he was at work. He'd offered to be present. She'd said she preferred to do it without an audience. He'd said fine, and meant it, and went to the office and reviewed subcontractor payment records for 4 hours without absorbing any of them. He came home that evening to a house that looked almost exactly the same. Almost. The spaces told the story. The living room wall where the painting had hung. Her painting from before they met, brought into the marriage in a flat cardboard sleeve, showed a slightly brighter rectangle where the paint around it had faded. The closet in the master bedroom had a different weight to it when he opened the door. Her side of the bathroom counter. The kitchen, where 2 of the better knives were gone, and the ceramic mixing bowl she'd had since graduate school. He stood in the kitchen for a long time. The amber light came through the back windows the way it always did at this hour. Long rectangles across the floor, going warm and then deeper, so finished its business, and the room went ordinary gray. He'd loved that light since the first walkthrough. He still did. That surprised him. Quietly. The fact that the house was still the house. That the thing he'd felt about it when they'd first walked through hadn't been contingent on her. He made dinner, ate alone at the kitchen table, washed 1 plate. He went upstairs and sat in his home office for a while, the Casio calculator on the desk. He'd brought it back up from his jacket pocket the morning after the confrontation and set it back in its corner. He looked at it, then he picked it up, turned it on, pressed a few keys, set it back down. Same result every time. He went to bed, slept better than he had in months. Phyllis came on Saturday. She brought groceries enough for a real meal, not takeout, not deli containers. She unpacked in his kitchen with the efficiency of someone who knew Dio Saint, which meant she knew him well enough to know, without asking. Which meant something about the long continuity of family that he hadn't had the bandwidth to appreciate during the weeks of everything else. She was thinner than he remembered. Her movements more deliberate. The careful energy of someone who had been very tired for a very long time, and was only recently learning what it felt like not to be. "You look better," he said. "I look like someone 6 months out of treatment." That's what I said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to the counter and the thing she was making, and the silence between them was the comfortable kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. She'd said what needed to be said on the phone that Tuesday night. He'd heard it. They'd been processing it separately in the weeks since. Her on her side, him on his. And now they were in the same room doing what people do when they've decided to move forward, without requiring the other person to earn it through excessive apology. Just showing up. Just being present. She made rice and baked chicken and collard greens with the seasoning their mother used. The kind that made the whole kitchen smell like Saturday mornings when they were young, and the problems of the world had not yet arrived in full. They ate at the table, talked about other things, her last scan, their mother's garden in Beaumont, which was apparently thriving under the management of a neighbor who had appointed himself its unofficial caretaker. A documentary they'd both watched about a jazz musician from New Orleans, whose life had gone sideways in the most spectacular ways before finally going right. At some point during the meal, Cedric looked at his sister, actually looked, the way you look at someone when you've been too deep inside your own situation to see clearly outward, and noticed the color in her face. Better than the phone call, better than the version of her he'd been carrying since that night. "You look good," he said. "I mean it more now." She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, something that had been braced slowly releasing. "Are we okay?" she said. Not performing, just asking. He thought about it the way he thought about everything that mattered, without rushing to the reassuring answer. "We're getting there," he said. She nodded, reached across the table and put her hand over his for a moment. Not dramatic. Just there. Then she went back to her plate, and they finished dinner. The divorce was finalized in February. He signed what needed signing at Diane's office. Received the final decree in an envelope Diane sent by messenger because she knew he'd prefer not to have to go and retrieve it from a clerk's window like a package. He opened it at his desk. Read it once. The language was the language these documents always used. formal and bloodless and precise in the way that legal endings are precise, accounting for the dissolution of something without being required to account for its meaning. He folded it, put it in a folder, filed it under closed, same label he used when a forensic audit was complete. Report filed, nothing left to find. He picked up his book, read one page, made coffee, went to work. In early March, he repainted his home office. He'd been meaning to do it for 3 years. The color, a warm gray Camille had chosen from a sample book and held up to the afternoon light and called clarity, had been fine. He'd agreed to it because it was fine and because it hadn't mattered to him at the time. It mattered now. He painted it navy blue, the deep, specific shade of a lake in early morning when the world hasn't started yet. His grandfather had taken him fishing on a lake that color when he was 8 years old, and he'd never forgotten the particular quality of that water at 5 in the morning. Still and deep and absolutely certain of itself. He did it himself. 2 coats, moved all the furniture, let it dry for a full day before he put anything back. When he replaced the desk and the lamp and the books, he left the walls bare except one thing. The Casio calculator, which he hung on a small hook at eye level beside the door. Not because of Camille, not in spite of her, because it was his, had been his since before her, would go on being his after, and it had never once told him the wrong answer. He stood in the doorway of his repainted office and looked at the room. Then, for the first time in 11 years in this house, he went downstairs and out the front door and bought a chair for the porch. A good one. Wide arms. Solid wood that said, "I intend to sit here regularly, and I'm not apologizing for taking up space." He put it on the porch, sat in it with his coffee the next morning. The neighborhood did what it always did. Dog walkers. The jogging couple who went past every Saturday in matching sneakers. The family across the street with 3 children who were always in the middle of some enormous project in the driveway. He'd lived here 11 years. He'd barely noticed any of them. He was noticing now. He started sitting on the porch every morning that the weather permitted. Sometimes with his book, sometimes with just the coffee. Letting the ordinary life of the street happen around him without needing to be somewhere else. He went back to the bookstore on the first Saturday of December. He'd missed 2 months of Saturdays. The chaos of October and November had eaten them. But it was December now, first Saturday, and some habits, the ones you've made on purpose and that have kept you level, you return to when the storm passes. Between the lines had put up a simple window arrangement. String lights. A few books on a small shelf with a handwritten card that said, "For the long nights." No manufactured cheer. Just the books and the light. He pushed through the door, the smell of old paper and the particular warmth of a small room heated by too many books and a space heater in the corner. Lorraine Dupree was at the back of the store on a step stool, reorganizing the biography section. She looked down when the bell above the door rang. "You're back," she said. "I'm back." She came down from the step stool, straightened her sweater, looked at him in the way she had of looking, not assessing, not performing concern, just seeing.
"You look different," she said. "Good different or bad different?"
She considered this with genuine seriousness.
"Not quickly."
"Lighter," she said finally, "like you set something down." He walked the shelves. Slowly. Pulling a book here, putting it back, pulling another. The ritual of it settling something in him that had been unsettled for 2 months. He brought one book to the counter. She looked at the cover without making a performance of it.
"That good,"
she said. "How good?" "It's about a man who spends his finding what's hidden in things and eventually has to learn to look at himself the same way." A pause. "I set it aside 2 weeks ago. Thought you might be back around now." He looked at her. "You picked this out for me. I noticed you hadn't been in. I noticed what you usually reach for." She met his eyes without making it complicated. "That's all." He stood at the counter with that for a moment. "That's either very thoughtful," he said, "or slightly unsettling." "Probably both," she said, and that was when it happened, the laugh. Coming from somewhere he hadn't been able to reach in 2 months, not performed, not manufactured, just there, rising and finding the nearest exit the way laughter does when it's real. She smiled, small and certain. The kind of smile that didn't need to be explained. He paid for the book, put it in the paper bag. "Lorraine," he said. Thank you. Not just for the book." She understood that. He could see that she understood it without requiring him to elaborate. "See you next Saturday," she said. Not an invitation, a statement of fact. He walked out into the December morning, cold and clear, the way Houston occasionally managed in winter. 2 blocks to his car. He drove home, parked a block away, walked the last bit on foot. On a Sunday morning in late March, Cedric made breakfast at his kitchen table, read his one page from the book Lorraine had chosen, finished his coffee, sat for a while in the light. He thought about the email from Reese Caldwell. 13 months of surveillance. He'd thought about it many times since February. Not the grinding, insomniac kind of thinking. The other kind, the kind where you turn something over periodically, like checking a fact you've already established, making sure the conclusion holds. It held. He'd been watched. He hadn't known. And Camille had used what she learned to build something he wasn't supposed to find until she was ready for him to find it. And still. Not because of some dramatic instinct that fired at the perfect moment. Not because she'd made an obvious mistake, because he'd paid attention. Because when something felt wrong in the data, even the data as personal as a Wednesday evening, as domestic as an email subject line visible at the edge of a screen, he'd followed it. Because that was who he was. Lorraine had said it. It's who you are, not just what you do. He'd turned that over too, found it more useful than almost as anything else he'd been told during the previous months. He went to the front door, opened it, stepped out onto the porch. The March morning was doing what March mornings in Houston did when they remembered their potential. Cool without being cold, the air carrying the first suggestion of things coming back. The trees on his street were budding, a thin green running along the gray branches. He sat in his chair, coffee in hand. The family across the street had a new project underway involving what appeared to be a bicycle, a garden hose, and a level of optimism that wasn't supported by the available tool. The jogging couple passed by and one of them raised a hand in greeting. Cedric raised his back. He sat there for a while, not doing anything, not planning anything, not organizing anything into columns, just sitting on his own porch, in his own chair that he'd bought on purpose, in the house that was still his, with the amber light in the kitchen and the navy blue office upstairs, and the Casio calculator on the wall and the front door he walked through every day as the person he'd always been, no footnotes required. He thought about something Lorraine had said on that first Saturday back in December, near the end of the conversation, almost as he was leaving. The habits you make on purpose become the most real ones, because they're the ones you chose. He'd thought about that all week. The most real ones. He thought about them now. The one page every morning before the day started. The block walked on foot before arriving anywhere. The Saturday bookstore. The coffee made at the same hour. The Casio calculator that had been on his desk for 22 years because he trusted it and knew exactly what it would do. None of these were dramatic. None of them had saved him in any obvious single moment. But they'd built something. A structure. An internal architecture of small, deliberate daily choices that had held him upright when other structures fell. He hadn't needed to be anyone's foundation to survive this. He'd only needed to be his own. He finished his coffee, set the mug on the armrest, looked out at the street, the budding trees, the ongoing optimistic bicycle project across the way. He went inside, made another cup, came back out, sat back down. The morning continued at its own pace. He had nowhere urgent to be. He had no ledger open. He had, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, exactly the life he was actually living. And that, sitting with the mild, solid, unhurried certainty of a man who has come through something and knows it, was enough. More than enough. A man who keeps his word in a world that doesn't always keep its promises back. That's not a weakness. It's not naivety either. It's a decision, made on purpose, every day. And that kind of decision kept long enough, build something no plan built at someone else's expense ever could. It builds you. And you, when everything else has settled and the ledger is closed and the morning is just a morning again, you are the thing that remains.